Chapter 12. It is possible, I suppose, to construct hypothetical circumstances in which you would be pleased to find yourself at the end of a long day in Maxville, New South Wales, perhaps something to do with rising sea levels that left it as the only place on earth not underwater, or maybe some disfiguring universal contagion from which it alone remained unscathed. In the normal course of events, however, it is unlikely that you would find yourself standing on its lonely main street at 6:30 on a warm summer's evening, gazing about you in an appreciative manner and thinking, "Well, thank goodness I'm here." I was in Maxville owing to the interesting discovery that Brisbane is not 3 or 4 hours north of Sydney, as I had long and casually supposed, but the better part of a couple of days' drive. Well, if you look on the television weather map, Brisbane and Sydney are practically neighbors, their little local suns and storm clouds all but bumping on the chart. But in Australia, neighborliness is, of course, a relative concept. In fact, it is almost 1,000 kilometers from Sydney to Brisbane, much of it along a cheerfully pokey two-lane road. And so, in mildly confounded consequence, I was in Maxville for the night. I don't wish to disparage a community that's 2,811 people proudly call home, and what a miraculous notion that is. But as I had rather had it in mind that I would be dining on fresh-caught barramundi and watching a sunset emblazoned on the Pacific on Queensland's storied Gold Coast, rather than stuck in an obscure backwater barely halfway there, my disappointment was real. My immediate preoccupation was that I was running out of time on this trip. I had a commitment of long standing to take part in a fundraising hike in Syria and Jordan for British Children's Charity. In 3 days, I was to fly home from Sydney to collect hiking gear and see how many of my children still recognized me before flying off again to London and onward to Damascus. It was clear that I wasn't going to see as much of the northern reaches of the Boomerang Coast as I had hoped. So my mood as I strolled into town from my motel was, let us say, restrained. Maxville wasn't so bad really. Set on the bank of the swift and muddy Nambucca River, it was essentially just a pause in the highway, a tentacle of neatly gardened bungalows and small office buildings leading to a very compact town center. Though the road through town is the Pacific Highway, the main artery connecting Sydney and Brisbane, only 2 cars passed as I followed its dusty margin into town. At the heart of the modest community stood the large and fading Nambucca Hotel, and I stepped in, glad to escape the heat. It was a roomy place, but nearly empty. 2 older guys in tank tops and battered bush hats propped up one end of the long bar. In a side room, a man and a woman sat in silent absorption amid the soft mechanical glow of pokie machines. I procured a beer, stood long enough to establish that no one was going to take any interest in me that might lead to a conversation, and retired to the central portion of the bar where I parked myself on a stool and idly watched the evening news on a silent TV mounted on the wall. Somewhere, police were out in the bush with a pack of straining sniffer dogs. There was no telling what the dogs were looking for, though if it was red clay soil, they were doing extremely well. Somewhere else there appeared to be a fresh outbreak of Ross River fever, yet another previously unknown malady for me to worry about. Then there was Paul Keating,
Hello?
the former
hey, Ann.
Prime Minister. He of the deeply expressive vocabulary, as you may recall from the Cambula chapter, standing on the steps of an office building, answering questions from reporters and looking testy.
Yes, yeah.
It was impossible to determine
Right.
what he was saying, but I imagined he was telling all those present that they were gnongs and
Right.
maggots. I decided I quite liked watching the news with the sound
Right.
off.